aspects of today, and I really am appreciative of both Tracy and Tiernan giving up their time to talk to us this morning. Just to introduce you to both of them, one of the things that Paul O'Brien, I suppose, mentioned yesterday was that Limerick City was very wealthy in the 19th century, and then coming into the 20th century, it underwent or experienced, quite significant period of economic decline. And I suppose if you look at Ireland, Limerick City is an area that is challenged in terms of exclusion, unemployment, etc. And Tracy and Tiernan are two of the, I suppose, leading principals of schools that are located in quite disadvantaged areas. I'm not going to talk to you about their areas because they will speak to you about it themselves. But they have a very long experience of working with disadvantaged communities and working with families and parents with very, very complex needs. So I asked them to talk about the DESH initiative that has been in Ireland since the early 2000s, and to just, I suppose, share some of their experiences of working with challenging communities. So over to you, Tracy and Tiernan.
Thanks, Annie. And you're going to share the PowerPoint?
Oh, have you not got? Oh, sorry. Okay, you can talk there while I get it.
Okay. My name is Tracy Tobin, and I'm teaching in St. Michael's Infant School. I think my colleague Maria was speaking to you yesterday with regards to her ASD special class. So my school is situated in the inner city, so right in the middle of Limerick city centre, whereas Tiernan's school would be out in the suburbs. So my school is over 150 years old, and it was relocated to its current location back in the early 90s, when the school that it was in was sold by the Bishop of Limerick. And so the school had to relocate to a campus that has another primary school and a secondary school on site. So we've been there since. So we're kind of very unusual in that we're a school within a school. So I would have taken over I would have started in the school in September 2000. And at that time, there was only 12 pupils in the school. So there was the principal and myself. So we have grown considerably since September 2000. So this September, we have 16 teachers, 10 special needs assistants, a caretaker and a secretary. So we have a considerable staff in comparison to what we would have had in September 2000. And I suppose that's very much reflective on the growth in the inner city area itself. We would, we'd have an awful lot of newcomer families who have moved to Ireland in recent years and have located themselves in the inner city of Limerick, and they would rent apartments locally. So we would have a lot of newcomer families where English wouldn't be their first language. So it's really interesting group of children and parents. And I suppose we would have a lot of Irish families too, and they would all be considered disadvantaged. So in the sense that they would come from areas, they would rent in the local social areas, and they would also be, a lot of them would be unemployed or lone parents. So I suppose, Tiernan, if you want to talk about your school.
Tracy, can you see the presentation?
I can now, yeah. Tiernan, do you want to introduce yourself first before we start?
Perfect. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, just to give you a little bit of background about the school here in Moyross. My own name is Tiernan O'Neill, and I'm the principal of Corpus Christi School in Moyross in Limerick City. And as Tracy has mentioned already, it's a suburb on the northern side of Limerick City. And I suppose Moyross as a community, it's probably synonymous with a lot of the societal ills that impact on the modern day world, really. At one point, it would have been the largest local authority housing estate in Ireland and in Great Britain. There would have been 1,200 houses here over 7,000 people were living here, and there wasn't even a shop here. So it was probably a prime example, probably what you see in your own countries of really poor local council planning to have that. And again, sadly, a lot of the families within the community were families with lots of additional needs, suffering from, all sorts of issues with regards to, addiction, abuse, etc. So you can imagine having that concentration of people. I'm sure it's similar situations in your own country in one place. It really would be for disaster. And I suppose to quantify that, the Central Statistics Office in Ireland, they use what's called the Poverty Deprivation Index to look at the scale of deprivation and poverty within communities in Ireland. And it's a scale that goes from plus 30 to minus 30. And the deprivation index, sadly, in Moyross would have a score worse than minus 20. And it would be quite unique, Moyross, in that no part of Ireland has so many small areas clustered together, I suppose, scoring so high in relation to levels of deprivation. And as a result of that, in more recent years, Moyross and other areas of Limerick City have been part of a government regeneration plan. But sadly, the regeneration plan has focused more so on the physical regeneration of the communities rather than on the social or the economic regeneration of the communities. And it's led to a huge amount of, and ironically, given we have a homeless crisis in this country, it's led to a huge amount of demolition of houses. So over 600 houses have been demolished in Moyross, and over 1,000 houses have been knocked, social houses have been knocked across the city. Again, which is bizarre in the current climate when you look at the levels of homelessness. From my own experience, I suppose I've been in the school almost 20 years now, and I've worked as a class teacher and as a homeschool community liaison coordinator, and obviously principal as well. And the homeschool community liaison scheme is something, the HSCL you'll see there on the slide, is something that we'll speak about in more detail in a little while. It's probably the most, I would think it's probably the most important role within the school. It's a teacher within the school who works almost as a quasi family support worker, social worker, working with families, connecting with families, supporting families. It's a hugely important role. And I suppose within the community here, sadly, over the years, I've seen a huge amount of murders, criminal feuding, a lot of intimidation as a result of drug issues. And obviously, as I've mentioned already, a lot of homelessness. And I suppose Tracy and myself will be very I suppose, passionate about the need for social justice, fair treatment for all in society. And, we speak a lot about equality. And I suppose for me personally, equality isn't about treating children the same. It's about giving children the same resources, or the necessary resources, so they can reach the same baseline, and start from the same baseline. And I would like to think that that's probably what the DESH scheme has provided us with over the last probably 15 years. And what DESH stands for, it's an acronym, is Delivering Equality of Opportunity in Schools. And DESH is also the Irish for chance. And I suppose that's what our schools are all about. It's about giving children chances, very often children that are swimming against the tide. And just there, the Education Act we've mentioned, it's I suppose, the piece of legislation that underpins our education system, and it refers to educational disadvantage as being the impediments to education arising from social or economic disadvantage, which prevents students from deriving appropriate benefit from education in schools. And I've mentioned some of those barriers. When we see it, and Tracy sees it on a daily basis, you have, migrant children living in direct provision centres, you have homeless children living in hotels, you have children coming from homes where there's huge issues around addiction. So it's very important that we have supports in place to actually enable these children to engage with the education system. And
I think, Tiernan, just if I can come in and just say about the housing situation is a huge issue, because you know yourself, your house is everything to you. It's your home. It gives you a sense of belonging. And, though a lot of our children wouldn't have that sense of belonging, they don't know where they're going to be sleeping tonight. They don't know where they're going to be sleeping tomorrow night, because they're going from hotel to hotel, because they don't have a place to call home. And I think, as Tiernan was saying, the demolition of houses in Moyross. And just to add, I taught myself in Moyross when I first came out of Mary Immaculate College. I taught in Moyross for 4 years. And I have family living in Moyross, and it's a fantastic community. But what regeneration did, it came in and it demolished these beautiful houses, and and has left a situation now where you have families without places to call home. But yet, this demolition has taken place. I myself will come from another kind of regeneration area, St. Mary's Park. It's where I grew up myself as a child. And I just saw a lovely visual. Well, it wasn't lovely, it was a very sad visual on Twitter the other night. A teacher had it up, a teacher in the school in St. Mary's had it up, and it was like she asked her children what would they like, and what they wanted was a house. a house in the area where their cousins live, where their parents live, and they don't have that. And I think, Tiernan, that's a huge part of our problem as principals, that we're dealing with parents every single day that have no place to call home for their children. And it's very, very sad. And it doesn't, you know, and then we're trying to educate these children. They go home and they don't even have a place to do their homework, you know. So it's really, really, it's a dreadful situation at the moment. Yeah, sorry, Tiernan.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. In terms then, guys, of how we, Tracy School, my own school, how we were identified as DEIS schools, there would have been a piece of research carried out by the Educational Research, I suppose now a statutory body in accordance with the Education Act, and they would have looked at the socioeconomic variables the predicted achievement. So they looked at variables such as unemployment levels within an area that a school supported and serviced, you know, the levels of local authority housing, the levels of lone parents, concentration of members of the travelling community, you know, how many large families you would have. A large family would have constituted more than 5 children. And then obviously pupils that were eligible for the free book scheme. So emanating from that, then schools were classified in particular ways. So where the levels of disadvantage were considered greatest in kind of urban areas and towns, primary schools were classified as participating in the band 1 of DEIS. So they would be the schools, I suppose, with the greatest concentration of need. The remaining participating primary schools were classified as participating in band 2 of DEIS. And then obviously you had primary schools serving rural communities or towns with populations less than 1,500 people. They were included in the rural strand of DEIS. And all of those different kind of, I suppose, means of identifying then provided us with benefits, shall we say. So, for example, both myself and Tracy is the principal of a junior school. I would be the principal of, so Tracy would have children, junior infants, senior infants, first class. So really from about 4 to 7, Tracy, I suppose that would be fair to say.
Yes.
Yeah. And then I would be the principal of a vertical school. So that's from junior infants right up to 6th class. So you'd be talking from 4 years of age up to 12, 13 years of age. So we've been reasonably fortunate in that there's designated staffing schedules for DEIS Band 1 schools. For example, in Tracy School, which is considered a junior school, the pupil-teacher ratio will be 20 pupils to 1. For our school, a vertical school, it's 24 pupils to 1. And obviously, you know, when Tracy mentioned some of the additional supports we have to provide principals or provide parents with, and the wider community, it would be quite difficult for Tracy to be working as both, say, a teaching principal and then trying to complete this type of family support work. So thankfully, DEIS schools as well get administrative principals appointed on lower enrolments. It's about, I think, is it 116 pupils, I think, Tracy?
Yeah, it's 116 pupils, but then it's less if you have special classes.
Okay.
Two special classes, the threshold is reduced to 81 children, which is quite good. But you know,
so it would
but
be
as
quite...
Tiernan says, it's impossible to do the job if you have to teach as well as be a principal. So it's the job that nobody wants, because you can't do either role to the best of your ability, because you're constantly compromised and pulled from one to the other. It's very, very difficult. So those low thresholds are really, really important.
Yeah, and Tracy is absolutely right in what she's saying, and I would even see in my role, and obviously I'd be an administrative principal as well, that, you know, we have this utopian concept of principals being leaders of learning. Like, my role would be so far removed from that whole notion of being a leader of learning. Like, you're a family support worker, at times you're a family mediator, at times you're counselling parents as a result of addiction issues. And I suppose within our structures, and Tracy would be the same, we're quite fortunate that we're very supportive deputy principals, we've very supportive staff who ensure that good learning continues and ensure that the structures and the mechanisms are in place, because I suppose we spend a lot of our time firefighting. And I suppose, again, an additional support we would receive from the Department of Education is, as a result of our DEIS status, we receive DEIS grants. And they're obviously based, again, on the level of disadvantage and on our enrolment. So it's per pupil, per capita, we get a DEIS grant. And again, that enables us to subsidise a lot of the work that we have to do. Obviously, we wouldn't have access to, you know, big fundraisers that the Parents' Council would run, maybe, should we say, in non-DEIS schools. So again, it enables us just to fill some of or plug some of the gaps that we would have with regards to our budgets and our finances. And probably for me, one of the biggest benefits, and I've mentioned it already, of the DEIS scheme is access to the HSCL, or the Homeschool Community Liaison Scheme. And we're very fortunate here that we have a full-time homeschool community liaison coordinator. And as I said already, that's a teacher within the school who's assigned to the role, who works within the community, supports parents, develops kind of, I suppose, parent and family education programs, calls to homes, engages with the wider family, and looks at how we can put supports in place. And there's an old African proverb that underpins that scheme, and it takes a whole village to raise a child. So it's not just about working with the child in isolation, it's working with the family and also working with the wider community. And I myself was fortunate enough, back from 2005 to 2010, I had spent 5 years teaching, but I then spent 5 years as the homeschool community liaison teacher here. And that gives you a completely different perspective on life within these communities. You know, when you go beyond the hall door and you see what really goes on in these children's lives. And I remember when I started in the role, I suppose the community here was at quite a low ebb, and there would have been a lot of criminal feuding, a lot of murders. So you would have been calling to homes at the time where children would sleep in the hall landing with their parents because they couldn't sleep in their own rooms in case a stray bullet would come through their window. Or you'd be calling to homes where there would be no natural light coming into the houses because they would have steel shutters over the windows and the doors in case a petrol bomb was thrown at their house. And then we were expecting these children to come in and engage with an English curriculum or a maths curriculum. It just didn't make any sense. And it really opened my eyes to the importance of supporting the children both socially and emotionally, because if we didn't do that, there was no way that they could access the academic, shall we say, that they were due to do on a daily basis here. And that would be something, I suppose, both myself and Tracy would be very, I suppose, keen to emphasize, and I suppose very passionate about, again, is the importance of the holistic approach, that it's not just about focusing on, you know, the academia. You have to support the children socially and emotionally. And to be fair to the DEIS scheme, it has certainly enabled us to, I suppose, look at the holistic development of the child. And we've been fortunate with some of the support we have received. An example of that, obviously, is the Homeschool Community Liaison Scheme, that we can move forward and support the families and the children in a more holistic way.
And I think, you know, Tiernan there, because, you know, coming in there, the home HSCL scheme is absolutely fantastic. And I think since COVID arose and we've come back to schools, we really miss that connection, because it isn't now safe, because we are currently in level 5 here. It isn't currently safe to visit the amount of houses that we would normally have, you know, that the HSCL would have visited, especially in the first term, and the new junior infants, you know, would have been targeted in the first term, but it has become very difficult now to be able to do that in a safe way. And I don't know about you, Tiernan, but in our school, you know, we see that fallout, and we can see how much we're missing that, you know, the fact that the HSCL can't actually go and knock at the door at the moment, because it isn't safe. And I don't know, Tiernan, do you want to say anything about that? It is, you know, it just shows the importance of it.
Yeah, Tracy, again, is spot on what she's saying. And I suppose over the last 15 years, since the inception of the DEIS scheme, you know, schools have spent a huge amount of time building supports and building structures for parents. For example, virtually on a daily basis here and in Tracy School, you would have parent mornings. You would have parents coming in, engaging in numeracy programs and literacy programs with their children. You would have adult education programs going on in the school. And I suppose, again, it broke down a lot of the barriers and the preconceptions and misconceptions, I suppose, that parents had about modern day education. Sadly, a lot of them would have had very poor and negative experiences of school life. A lot of them would have left school very young. They could have been 11, 12 years of age. So again, it's important for them to see how education has changed, how it's moved on, and how we want them to be equal partners in this process. Because for us, ultimately, it's about working with the parents, because if we're serious about breaking this cycle of disadvantage and underachievement, we have to work with the parents. But as Tracy has alluded to, COVID has hugely restricted the access we have to parents. And unfortunately, in the current climate, parents can't come in and they can't engage in the programs. So both myself and Tracy have huge concerns about, I suppose, the long-term impact of that on the progress.
Yes, I think it has set us back a few years, to be honest, because we had made such fantastic progress with parents. And I think for me, and Tiernan would be very like me, our priority would always be the parents, because as you say, you target the parents, you get the parents on side, you get the parents to realise the importance of education. And really, once you have them on board, you're almost guaranteed that that child will be successful at school. And I think that is really, really, really important, because that's all we want. We want to make sure that the little child that comes in our door, age 4, is going to be successful and that they would reach their full potential. And I think that's what DESH is all about. And that's why I totally, absolutely believe in DESH. I think it is the most important initiative that has been rolled out in education in recent times. For me, coming from a DESH background myself, I can see how much it has done for education. Personally myself, it is just amazing. Myself, I have 4 children of my own. I sent all of my children to my own school, so they all came to my school where I'm principal, because I really do believe in a DESH being a really good school and giving the children a very good education. And I would have 3 teenagers now that are in post-primary, and they're going to the post-primary school that I went to myself, and that is a DESH Band 1 post-primary school too. And they're going there because I believe in it, and I think it's really, really important. And it's great, I think, for there to be a mix of backgrounds in DESH schools, because that really is important for the other children, for my own children, for all of the children, that they're not just in a middle class school, but that they're in a mixed school. And I think that's kind of where we're falling behind in Ireland. We could really do more to ensure that we would have that mix in all of our schools, because it isn't happening at the moment, but it is something that I think that we could work on in Ireland. Going on with the benefits for DESH schools, the school meals programme is a fantastic programme. In my situation in school, the children come into my school at 8:20 in the morning, and they're given their breakfast. And it's, the uptake is fantastic. They're in school on time, and we've really seen the benefit of this. It's a new thing that we tried this year because of COVID, because of being on the same campus as other schools. We need to stagger arrival times, so we decided to start earlier again, get them in and give them their breakfast, and it is working. They are all coming into school for their breakfast, and they're enjoying that time, that social time in their classrooms in the morning, having their breakfast. And we know then as a staff, that they've had that real substantial meal to start the day, and that means a lot too for children when they're starting out, on a full day's education at school. Another initiative in our schools would be the school completion programme. That's another fantastic programme. It kind of runs side by side with the homeschool community liaison scheme. And what the school completion programme does is it would have a coordinator and a number of project workers underneath the coordinator, and they will provide supports to those children, the most targeted children that would be at risk of early school leaving. So that programme would work, the coordinator would work with a number of schools, and they would target those children, even the minute they walk in the door at 4, the ones that we kind of feel that may be at risk of early school leaving. We put in every single support we can. It can be an in-school support, it can be an out-of-school support, it can be a homework club, it can be a holiday support. But it's just all of these supports to make school a positive place for these children, so that when they come to school, they enjoy being at school and they love going to school. They come in smiling and they come home smiling. And I think this project has really improved the retention rates in schools. And I think it went up to 83% of children completed their education from DESH schools in the most recent survey that was done. Also at the DESH school, we get fantastic supports. We get lots of training in literacy and numeracy. So our teachers would always engage in supports. And I know when teaching jobs come up in non-DESH schools, and teachers from DESH schools would apply for non-DESH school jobs, they are immediately taken by the non-DESH schools, because principals in those schools would always report that teachers in DESH schools receive so much more training than teachers in non-DESH schools. And it's one of the advantages of teaching in a DESH school. So we would, like I myself, would have completed training in reading recovery, in maths recovery, and they're research-based programs that work, that really, really improve outcomes for children. They're so targeted, and they work in a one-to-one situation. So again, you'll be targeting those children that are most at risk in order to give them the best supports you can. So as a teacher in a DESH school, we definitely have the advantage of getting the best training that's out there. We also get additional funding for school books. So in other words, for, you know, to buy books for children. I'm talking about school academic books. So I know this year there was a pilot initiative rolled out among DEIS schools. Not all DEIS schools received it, but those that did receive it received full funding in order to purchase school books for all of the children in their school. And I think that's fantastic, because you were guaranteed that every child comes into school day one with all of their school books. Because I don't know about you, Tiernan, but it is a problem every single year. You always have a number of children that don't have their school books coming to school. And for me, in an infant school, they need their books because they write into them. So it's not books that you can reuse year on year, whereas you can do that further up the school, like second to sixth, where they don't write into the books. So you could, have a rental scheme there for those pupils. But for me, it is really important that they all have their own class book. So the school book grant is really beneficial for those children. As well as that, I just wanted to say something about the pupil-teacher ratio that Tiernan mentioned earlier. So in mine, in an infant school, is 20:1. We believe that it should be 15:1 in the infant classrooms. But that's something that I suppose our unions here in Ireland are working towards. This year we saw in the Irish budget, we saw a reduction in the pupil-teacher ratio for non-DEIS schools, and also for non-DEIS schools and for senior DEIS schools. But unfortunately, my school being an infant school and Tiernan school being a vertical DEIS school, we didn't see that reduction. So now Tiernan in a vertical school has a pupil-teacher ratio of 24:1, whereas a non-DEIS school has a pupil-teacher ratio of 25:1. So the gap is, it's too small in my opinion, and I think the government in Ireland need to do something to reduce the pupil-teacher ratio in the vertical DEIS schools and in the junior DEIS schools, because the non-DEIS schools are catching up with us. And that's, that was the biggest advantage for us as being a DEIS school, is that we had lower pupil-teacher ratios, because the children genuinely need the extra support. They're coming from, the disadvantaged backgrounds that Tiernan alluded to earlier. So that's something that, we are working towards in Ireland, that our unions are working towards, and we currently have a campaign underway to try and remedy that situation. So the next slide, Angela. So the DEIS themes, because we're DEIS schools, we have to plan. The school inspectorate, would, want us to plan. So we do 3-year plans. So we did plans from 2017 to 2020. Now this year we should have been planning again for the next 3 years, but because of COVID, we have to stay the same. So we don't have to do a new plan until next year because of the gap that occurred there when schools closed in March. So the themes that we use to plan for would be literacy, numeracy, attendance, because attendance is crucial. If children don't attend school, obviously they're not going to learn. So, and retention is keeping those children in school. Transitions, it's when they move from preschool into my school, and then maybe when they finish in my school and first and they move on to the senior school. Those transitions can be very difficult for DEIS children, and particularly when they're finished like in a vertical school. So when Tiernan's children finish in 6th class and they move to post-primary, that's a really, really delicate time in their lives. That's when they need the most support. So that's what transitions is all about, putting in support so to make that transition as easy as possible for those children. So again, the homeschool community liaison coordinator, the school completion project, the school principal would play huge roles in making sure those transitions are seamless as possible. And then partnership with parents, which we spoke about also, the homeschool community liaison scheme, the principal. I know the principal is supposed to be the leader of learning, but as Tiernan said earlier, and I would agree with him, it's very difficult to be a leader of learning when you're dealing with the fallout of society. And that's what we kind of do on a daily basis, is keeping all the pieces together, keeping the show on the road. And as a principal, we would do that by greeting parents in the morning, by being at the gate when they arrive, and being at the gate when they leave, so that you're trying to see what's going on in the community and you're trying to sort out any issues that may be arising so that they don't impact on the children. So that, the principal would play a very important role in that area as partnership with parents. And partnership with others is linking out to the community and working with the community as best we can. And we would do that. And I know Tiernan would serve on a lot of boards in his community. And I would also serve on boards, you know, with other services. For example, I'm the chairperson of Bedford Row Family Project. It's a project in Limerick that works with families and children who may have family members in prison. So we support families and the children as they, you know, try to overcome having a parent or a family member in prison. So we're looked on as being really important people in the community, and we're asked quite a lot to be representative on boards in the community. So that would be a big part of our job too.
And just to say, Tracy, if you look at those DESH teams, like the progress, you know, quite regularly the inspector would carry out DESH evaluations, so would come to the school and examine where the school is at in terms of those various DESH teams. And like I think back to, and Tracy can do the same, when you think back to the origins of DESH and where DESH schools were actually at, like we were at a really, really low base. Like I think back to 2005, like the community here was imploding, but the school was as well in terms of literacy levels, numeracy levels, attendance, behaviour. So, you know, when you look at the strides that have been made over the last 15 years, it's testament to the scheme. And as Tracy has said, like I would be similar to Tracy in that I would firmly believe in what underpins it. And you look at the progress that has been made, it's absolutely phenomenal. And again, I suppose it's credit to the homeschool liaison scheme, the school's completion schemes, all the various little bits and pieces that come together and create this landscape that enable us to, you know, ensure that children can maximise the educational opportunities that are there for them.
Yes, definitely. So I suppose there is, as Tiernan was talking about DESH evaluations, so, you know, every now and again you would have an evaluation in your school where the inspector would come in and would examine you under those themes that we just showed you. And I suppose they would have done, the most recent publication would have been, there was 44 individual evaluations carried out by the Department of Education inspectors between 2010 and 2014. And, you know, there was a lot of positive findings made. And, you know, 60% of the findings are grouped under the following headings. So leadership of the planning process, so that came out really positive. The commitment of staff to the process also came out positive, because I really do think that, you know, not every teacher would be suited to teach in a DESH school. I think you definitely have to have a level of compassion and empathy, and you have to understand where you're teaching. You have to understand the children. You have to understand where they're coming from. And I think, you know, teachers in, you know, playing the role of the homeschool community liaison is a fantastic way for a teacher to understand where the children that sit in front of us actually come from. And, you know, myself, as coming from a DESH background, I know at first hand where all of the children come from. Tiernan too was homeschool, going into houses back then. It's the only way, you know, that you really get DESH and you really understand it. And it's crucial to the success for those children that the teachers standing in front of them actually get DESH and understand it and empathize with those children. You know, if a child comes into school with no school uniform, I don't care, as long as the child is sitting in front of me and is happy. And I don't care about a school uniform. It is important, but it's not the most important thing. Do you know what I mean? It's, you know, and I don't know, Tiernan, do you agree with me there?
I couldn't agree with you more. And it's interesting, an observation from another teacher just before the Halloween holidays. Our deputy principal recently retired, and our homeschool liaison teacher is now the deputy principal. So there was a young teacher here has taken over as the homeschool liaison. Now, he's been working here about 7 years, working in the class, and has worked as a special education teacher. But he spent a few weeks before Halloween, I suppose, shadowing, shall we say, and working with the homeschool liaison coordinator. And he told me that he learned more in a week than he did in his previous 7 years in the school from calling to homes. He said the insight he got was just incredible. Now, as Tracy said, it's not for everybody. It takes a particular type of person. You know, I think you need obviously a level of empathy and insight and understanding and just general care and compassion. But I thought it was a fascinating observation that you could work in a school for 7 years and a week in a role would provide you with greater insights. So I suppose that sums up, for me anyway, the importance of the scheme in terms of what it provides you with regards to perception and insight.
And I think it's probably one of the best things out of COVID as well, is that our teachers, that, you know, we had to become really creative about engaging with children and parents during COVID when the schools were closed. And the teachers were phenomenal. You know, they went into school, they put packs together for the children, they delivered them to the children's doors so that the children weren't at home without a book, because a lot of our children wouldn't even have a book to read at home. So the teachers knew that, they realized that, went into school, put packs together, drove around and delivered these packs to the children, and kept in daily contact with those children to make sure that they were okay. And they have reported back to me, they could not believe that some of the children lived in the circumstances that they lived in, because some of them are living in appalling circumstances, and they still come into school with that smile on their face, and they still leave with the smile on their face, and they're still pleasant and beautiful children at school. So I think COVID has done a good thing in one way for staffs, for teachers, because they now have a deeper understanding of our families and where they come from. And I think that's really important too. So another positive outcome of the evaluations, and you can see it there, the successful implementation of interventions. Those interventions would be like the reading recovery programs, the maths recovery programs, the parent classes, all of those. And they really are successful, because you can see improvements in the children and in the parents that participate in those interventions. And again, the impact and the progress. We have made huge progress in Desh schools, and I really do. I am so proud of being a principal of a Desh school, and I'd say Tiernan can say the very same thing. We're in a very unique situation in that we can really make an impact on the children that come in the door of our schools, because we genuinely believe in each and every one of those children and their parents, and we believe that once they get the appropriate interventions and supports, that they will be just as successful, or if not more successful, than a child in a non-Desh school. And I really do think, and I'm very proud of that. And I cannot see myself being in a non-Desh school ever, because I attended Desh schools, I worked in Desh schools, I'm a principal of Desh school. I've always linked with Desh schools, because I totally believe in them. And I know Tiernan is very similar to me, and I know he believes the very same, even though I'm not speaking on his behalf.
I couldn't
but
agree.
I'm so happy to be where I am.
No, I couldn't agree with Tracy more, and I think for us, really, you see these children on a daily basis, and they're literally swimming against the tide. You look at the difficulties that life has thrown at them, and they're remarkable, absolutely incredible. And I think from my perspective, I think it was Rita Pearson that used to say that every child deserves a champion, and adults never give up on them. I would like to think that's what it's all about for us. It's about ensuring that these children get the best possible opportunities, because the potential is just incredible in these children. They're absolutely amazing, and it's so important to continue
and
to
we're
build
lucky
that.
too, I think. We're lucky too, Tiernan, that the parents can come to us and they can tell us things before it actually gets out of control and it gets too serious. And an example would be, and Tiernan would have numerous examples. An example for me would have been the week before the schools closed due to COVID. I had a parent come in to me to talk to me with her own mother, and she told me that she was going away at that weekend because she needed to go and go to rehabilitation, suffered from an addiction. And she was able to come into my office and tell me that she was going away to get help, and she wouldn't be back until July, and that her mother was going to be looking after the children. And she was able to give me the numbers of her mother and the contacts and all of that. I don't think that could happen in a non-Desh school as easy as it happened in the Desh school. And that parent, in fairness to her, she went away, 3 small children, believed her children could visit her every single week where she was. But then COVID set in, and the children couldn't visit her because we were in lockdown. So she stuck it out. She stayed there until the end of July, and she's now, fantastic. She's after getting herself a job. The children are really happy. She's in a fantastic place. And she has actually come to me and thanked the school for the support that was given to her mother and her children when the school closed down, because we targeted that family to make sure that the grandmother was okay and had all of the support she needed, because we knew she was there with 3 small children while her own daughter was having was in rehabilitation. So that is a testament to Desh schools. That happens all the time. That's just one example. That would happen all the time, and Tiernan would have 100 examples to mine one example.
Tracy, ultimately, and without going into, I know you're kind of caught for time, I won't give any more examples, but what it ultimately for me comes down to is, comes down to relationships. It comes down to the power of the relationship and the power of the connection. I think that's what, more than anything else, more outside of DEIS evaluations and literacy programs and numeracy programs, that's what I think the DEIS process and program has cultivated over the last 15 years, that power of connection and relationship, just how important it is in terms of education. I can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah, I agree. So,
thank you
unless
very
you have
much.
any questions, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Tracy and Tiernan. Just one thing, would you mind just talking? You've given a very good overview of DEIS, but one of the, I suppose, the reason why I asked both of you to present to the group is because you're also very connected to, and you did mention it about on boards, etc., but you're also very involved in research, and particularly with Mary I, you've a long involvement in projects. So we work, or our students go, our undergraduate students do lots of school placements in the school, and just how important that is. I mean, because I suppose one of the things that I would say about the DEIS initiative in Limerick is that it really had the ability to link up teacher education with the schools, and it has just it has transformed our education as well. And Maria Dervan talked a little bit about that yesterday, and I meant to say to the audience that Maria is a teacher in Tracy's school.
I suppose, I know there's a DEIS elective in Mary Immaculate College where in fourth year, is it, Angela, they do the electives?
Third and fourth year, yeah.
Third and fourth year. So I know the DEIS elective is always very well sought after, and we would have students then that would come out on placement to our schools, to our DEIS schools, so they can experience at first hand what a DEIS school is like. And those students are always fantastic. We love having them because they're extra pair of hands too in the classroom, and they help us to further reduce the pupil teacher ratio. And Tiernan and I will be invited as guest speakers to Mary Immaculate College on regular occasions to speak to those students as well in their electives. And I know they always genuinely like to get the word from what's happening on the ground. The students like to hear what it is like in a school, and I think they appreciate having that input from principals that working on the ground. And we're also involved in a network. It's called the Oscailt network, and it was started back about 10 years ago. Tiernan, was it?
About 10 years ago now, Tracy.
Yeah. We got some funding from the dormant funds account, so bank accounts where there was dormant funds. We managed to get funding from them, and what the funding was used for was to open up the DEIS schools, primary and post-primary. So that's why it's called Oscailt, Open Doors. And so we use that funding to provide after-school classes and activities for the children, so that the intention was to keep the children in school for as long as possible, because we felt that school was the best place for a lot of our DEIS children to be. So that was a fantastic initiative, and it was run by Mary Immaculate College. It was run by the TED, which is transforming education through dialogue. So arising out of that, we formed that network of principals, both primary and post-primary, and we're called the Oscailt Network of Principals. And while that funding now is gone, we have still maintained those after-school activities, and we've also maintained that network of principals. So we meet about 3 to 4 times a year as a group of principals, and we get to talk about our schools and what's going on in our schools, and share ideas and share good practice and build relationships between principals. Because very often I pick up the phone to Tiernan, and Tiernan pick up the phone to me, and we'd be asking each other, this happened in my school, what would you do? And it's great to have that support network there. And, and that is really down to Mary Immaculate College, because they're the ones that started this up and got us to work together as a group. Whereas before that, schools, you go in your school door, you close the door, you're on your own. That doesn't happen anymore now. It's very much open, and we very much work together.
Yeah, I suppose a tangible example of that as well, Tracy, was the DEIS literacy initiative. And
Yes.
That's very, I think, proactive response again from stakeholders, including Mary Immaculate College. And again, it was, I suppose, what underpinned the initiative was looking at how we can improve literacy with attainment levels within the DEIS schools through collaboration, through teacher networks, through reflective practice, you know, and schools working together. And it was fantastic, the sharing of best practice, like teachers literally opening their doors in the various schools and bringing teachers in to, I suppose, again, for teachers to look at examples of good practice within the schools. And, you know, it was very much a developmental process rather than an accountability exercise. You know, teachers felt that they were being listened to, part of a process. It wasn't just about coming in, you know, we're using data here to further, you know, criticize you. This is about actually supporting you and looking at how we can move things forward and progress things. And it was great. Again, obviously Mary and I were very involved in that process as well, and it had
lots of training as well for teachers.
Yeah, for the